Thank you so much. And we'll be kicking things off in just a few minutes. Thank you.
You hear me all? Okay, good. Good morning. My name is Ahmad Azzuddin. I'm the Vice President for Academic Student Affairs and Global Engagement here at Wayne State University. And on behalf of President Ambroy Wilson, Provost Mark Kornblue, and the entire leadership team at the university, we want to welcome you to Wayne State and to the inaugural Digital Inclusion Symposium, Research Symposium. We are very excited to have all of the researchers and the experts here. Thank you for being with us today. We've been proud to work with the City of Detroit, the Mayor's Office, Connect 313 over the last 3 years. And if there is any thing we learned from the events of the last 3 years is the importance of digital inclusion. And we also learned about the big divide and the big inequities and inequalities when it comes to digital inclusion and empowerment. We know that the access to broadband, access to computers, access to the internet. These are basics of life these days, and we know not everybody has that, and particularly in our region, in our city. And what can we do about that? So we are looking forward to hearing from all of you and all the experts that we have here about what can be done about this, and how can we all contribute to this work and continue to move this important agenda forward. This is the first convening. We know it's not going to be the last one. We at Wayne State are very committed to continuing these discussions and continuing this work, working with the city, with many of you on progressing and serving our communities and bridging that divide in the coming years and months and weeks. So we look forward to an engaging day. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Josh to take it from here.
Well, I mean, he's already said good morning, but I'll say good morning again. Good morning. So definitely excited for, not even just today, this is our 4th annual Digital Inclusion Week. And the reason why that is significant is not only has it been, 4 years for me here, but it's also a testament to the partners we have at the table and the endurance that we have. Oftentimes, whenever there are social initiatives, people will see it, it's a flash in the pan. A year and everyone gets excited about it, but year after year after year to keep showing up over and over and over again and to iterate and get better over time. I mean, that's a testament to everybody's collective desire to bridging the digital divide. The significance of today's event, as we look at a symposium, is an emphasis on learning. That's the thing that we wanted to drive home a lot. When people look at our current interventions and where we're going with our rescue plan funding in the city, people know that we've received $41 million all earmarked towards bridging the digital divide in Detroit from the rescue plan alone. And a lot of our funding mechanisms and what we plan on investing in, you'll see more as the RFPs come out, have been informed by a decade of research on the digital divide. And sometimes we're starting to see, especially with some of the folks who are disagreeing with what we're doing, that they just think that we have an agenda within the city and that we're pushing a certain thing because we feel that this is how to do it. It's like, no. We're actually standing on top of the research that has actually guided us over a decade. And so what we wanted this first Digital Inclusion Symposium to be, with an emphasis on learning, we wanted it to be something that we could acknowledge all of the research, no matter if it came from Baltimore, Cleveland, or any other city. We didn't really care about that part, but we wanted to see all of the collective efforts that have gone into bridging digital divides and have studied so that we can point to that in Detroit and say, okay, not only have we been able to do X, Y, and Z here, but at the same time, this is what we will do off of the research. So again, I think that what you're going to hear from us, especially on the city side, is gratitude and deep thanks for obviously you all showing up, but the research that you all have written that has guided us in our efforts over time. I'll also say for some of you, the news has already broken, but I'm also leaving the city of Detroit. And in a few weeks, the reason I'm saying a few weeks, I'm still figuring out everything. It's a pretty fast transition to be the CEO of Digital C. It is an internet provider in the city of Cleveland, and Cleveland is home for me. But one thing I want to make very clear, that whatever we're doing here, this same convening could happen in any city. Now, it just so happens to be that Detroit has the ability to convene people in this manner. And that is a gold star for Detroit. A lot of other cities do not have the ability to do this. I want people to recognize that. And so as I'm going back home, I'm still going to be looking at the lessons learned and still be looking at the research that has been done here and that will be done on behalf of the interventions in Detroit to guide those efforts. I do believe that if you're able to bridge a digital divide, notice I said A, because I'm in front of an academic audience today, so I can actually explain this for what it really is. Anytime I call the digital divide a paradigm of inequity, people are like, oh, what does that mean? Except for here. And so when I refer to it as a paradigm, and a digital divide, we obviously recognize that there are multiple digital divides. And so I think that what today I'm really excited about and what I would like for us to even, in between sessions to network about, those multiple digital divides that we're hearing so that when funding is allocated from the rescue plan and as funding is expected from the BEAD and all the other broadband investment that's to come from the federal side and then the dormant private side, we're now thinking in that vein. That's where we need to be thinking. I think we have a responsibility to be thinking that way and shifting discourse. And so I'm really excited for today, really thankful for seeing majority of you all. I mean, the fact that majority of these faces in this room are familiar, that's a great thing for me. I like that approach. And hopefully, and it is my desire that in the future, because I do know this is going to be a reoccurring thing, that there are going to be unfamiliar faces and that we are going to be bringing unfamiliar people into the fold so that they're able to see the way that their research actually embodies the digital divide and that we can then leverage that for new learning and new insights. So again, on behalf of the mayor, on behalf of the entire Connect 3 on 3 team, really excited that this is happening today. Know this will not be the last one. And visit me in Cleveland. Let's do some research in Cleveland. And if we want to scale this to be a regional thing, I am all for that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Joshua. And can everyone join me in just giving Joshua a round of applause for being a trailblazer and innovator in Detroit and for setting the stage for a really bright future that includes Detroit citizens being digitally included as well as those in Cleveland. It is my great pleasure to introduce our kickoff speaker, Ms. Francella Ocello. She's Executive Director of Next Century Cities, a Washington, D.C. nonprofit that focuses on expanding high-speed internet broadband connectivity across the United States. She is an attorney and a digital rights advocate whose work underscores the value of widespread broadband adoption and the ways that it can improve educational outcomes, economic mobility, as well as pathways for participating in our democracy. She advocates for public interest on a variety of technology and telecommunication issues, Francella provides expertise on government policies, and she is a true champion for digital inclusion and making sure that she's speaking for those who are marginalized, making sure that the policies that are written in ways that elevate, amplify, and create future opportunity. I would just like to say with warm gratitude, Francella and Next Century Cities is also the presenting sponsor for our inaugural Research Symposium, and we could not have pulled this off without her. So I'd like to welcome her to our platform, or to the marble floor here. Come on up, Francella. We can't wait to hear what you have to say. You want me to use?
Okay. Good morning, you guys. So I will say, I've been to many of these conferences and been here since almost the beginning of Josh's tenure in the city of Detroit. And I will say that one of the most beautiful things that can happen when we are building something that, before it was a sexy topic, before other people, were drinking the Kool-Aid, one of the most beautiful things that you can do is leave something in a better condition, and also something that lives on without you. And so I think the fact that Connect 313 is a living, breathing organization that can live without you, it's not the loss that I think that we should focus on. It's the fact that this is something that's actually been added to the city's repertoire, and the fact that this is the first of many research symposiums to happen right here on Wayne State's campus. So thank you so much, Josh, for all of your service. I'll tell you guys a little bit about me. So my name is Francella, as Naima mentioned, and I want to say a special thanks to all of the luminaries behind the stage that, really made this day come together, the Connect 313 people, the City of Detroit people, and also the people who are volunteers and do all of the other things in the background that make stuff like this happen. I go to a lot of cities. Even during COVID, I would travel to sometimes people's town hall meetings or show up to help people write op-eds and do their digital equity slide decks and things like that. And one of the things that eventually led me to do a year of research, last year I was a research fellow at the Kennedy School at Harvard University, and I literally focused my entire year on just talking to local officials, talking to policymakers, talking to state leaders about essentially not only how did we get here, but essentially what does the roadmap forward look like? And for me, I am a student of history, and I don't think that we can talk about broadband policy without understanding the power dynamics and essentially how we got here in this space. So when I go through some things today, I do want to start just by posing three large questions. And first, the first one really being the existential, how did we get here in this moment? The way that you answer that question might be a little bit different depending on your community, because your community might have connectivity. Your school might be doing a really good job with digital inclusion. Maybe your city council is making digital equity a priority. So when I say the how did we get here, I want to acknowledge that the here is something that's different depending on where you sit, right? And it feels different, it looks different, it has different limitations and different constraints. Also, I think another important question that we need to think about is not only what is next, but how do we actually take those steps together? Because I think very often we'll say, oh, we're gonna roadmap this, we're gonna do it, and we reinforce the same inequities that we were running away from, but just in different forms. And so it's important for us to say, when we're taking steps together, what's your role? How can you take ownership of it? How is it something that actually, when we get there, it's also the thing you wanted, it wasn't just my idea of what you needed. And so that's a piece about making sure that we're pulling in the people that we're purporting to help. And then lastly, I always think, the more we talk about the digital divide and deficit language, I always want to make sure we're thinking about this as an opportunity. And I think that it's really important that, forget about what we didn't get right. Yeah, we knew certain things were going to happen. Yeah, the system's working exactly as it was designed. So what can we do now? So I'll start with the first question and really just give some landscaping to what I found in my research, and not only in talking to policymakers, economists, and making sure we weren't just talking to people who focused on broadband. But one of the larger themes that came up was that in my research, the report is actually called the economic consequence and generational impact of the digital divide. And I opened the paper by talking about the fact, the fatal flaw that we focused on the infrastructure and making sure that the wires got into neighborhoods without thinking about the people infrastructure that made sure that the connection got across the threshold of your front door. So we didn't, and I know that's got some snaps in some places, and we didn't think about that part. That wasn't the part we measured. It wasn't the sexy part. We didn't have the people power to do it. We didn't have time to ask questions about, yeah, you have high-speed connectivity on your street, but maybe you don't have the devices or the know-how or the expertise to be able to take advantage of it. Maybe even if you subscribe, you can't maintain the subscription all year. Maybe you only stayed when the promo was good for 90 days, and then you took a break. We didn't think about them. They weren't in our measurements. And so when we talk about how we measure this and what we were chasing after, not only was the measurement wrong, but the goal was blurred. Then when we take another step and we talk about how we were regulating things, internet was never regulated to be set up to be with a framework to be a public good. And I want to compare it to, think about if you were moving into your neighborhood, you bought a house in a house with 500 houses, and they said, we're the electric company, and we're only going to come and serve your neighborhood if we have a 40% take rate. That wouldn't make any sense. Like, something about it would feel unconscionable. It wouldn't make sense. It would be like, what are you saying? I just want to walk in and make sure the lights turn on when I flip the switch. Or what about if we had water, where we said, yeah, we'll serve this area, but you're not going to get the clean water until you get 80% of your people to subscribe. So we're just going to drop off the dirty water until then. And something about that just doesn't feel good. So when we're talking about internet access, our policies were never meant to accommodate it, to be something that was in everyone's home and to make sure that everyone actually benefited from the advances in technology. And so when we understand those policy deficiencies, we also have to confront that ugly truth that for a really long time, both public and private entities are guilty of this, using this return on investment theory to justify where we did and did not go. And the reason why that part in particular is not only a problem, but also a fatal flaw, was because we ignored the fact that the communities that were overlooked or ignored were also contributing to the places, the more affluent places, that were getting deployment. So we didn't account for that, because when we go to those communities, we say it's charity. We're giving them some sort of discounted access, we're subsidizing something, but we didn't talk about the fact that they were subsidizing the affluent areas all along. And so when we really think about our policies and confront those like baseline truths, it brings us to a second existential question in terms of, okay, so what now? How do we take these steps together? And so when we think about the steps that we need to take together, I think for me, when I was doing my research, it was important to actually distill what was the household, state, federal, and overall impact of digital inequity. Because I think we do ourselves a disservice by just calling it a digital divide that impacts those households. Even in our suggesting, oh, it's less than 20 million households that are suffering from the digital divide by federal accounts, that doesn't account for the fact that at the household level, the people who are struggling with the digital divide are more likely to be the people who work in manual labor jobs, who don't have access to benefits and salaries in the same way. And that when we also think about how it actually has a long-term impact, even here in Detroit, I'll actually tell you a story about my cab driver. I was coming over here and my cab driver told me about all the different places that he's lived. He's lived in Tennessee, Minnesota, and one other state before he settled here in Detroit. He said he's been here in Detroit around Detroit for the past 22 years. As a cab driver, he lives in Hamtramck. And I said, oh, are you a homeowner? And he said, no, but we stayed there. Do you understand what that is for 22 years to live somewhere and not have equity in the place you live? Because that, for over half of the United States, that piece of equity is your first stake at generational wealth. So when you are not a homeowner, it's not only that you don't have equity in the community that you live, you don't have the asset, the nest asset, to pass on to your children. And so that's the economic piece that sometimes we overlook. And when we think about how that impacts people here in Detroit, 51% of Detroit residents today are renters. That is actually up from 45% 10 years ago. And so when we see that that's on a steady increase, that means that you have more and more people that have less and less equity in the communities they call home. At the state level, when you have that loss in equity, you also pay more in social services. So this idea that it was just the people who were disconnected, we missed it. We missed the boat on that measurement, because it's actually that we pay just a little bit more in healthcare because those are the people who maybe wait for emergency care instead of preventative care. We pay just a little bit more in education, not just in having to have people do training, but also in the loss of academic rigor, which reduces competitiveness. So there are lots of indirect costs that we don't account for on a balance sheet that are actually costs at even the local, county, and state level that cost all of us something. And so one of the key takeaways for me in my research was that there is a collective cost of the digital divide, but when we focus on the households that are disconnected, we can essentially erase that cost from the balance sheet. And nationwide, what happens is that you actually create trends of specific populations who will not have access to and will not be able to build wealth in an increasingly digitized economy. And so this isn't just about little Susie Q can't go to 6th grade remote learning class. This is about when you have high rates of disconnectivity, you actually pay more in social costs for everyone around them. And so if we thought about the digital divide as more of something that actually impacts the entire community where you have a disconnected household, maybe we'd be more aggressive about our solutions. I think one of the last existential questions I think that it's really important that we tackle, especially in places like this where we're here to celebrate learning and exchanging ideas, is to think about the fact that even if we didn't know 10 or 20 years ago, even if before COVID you saw this a little differently, you're like, I had no idea. I didn't have any ownership of that. Now that we do, what if we treated this as an opportunity to build the equitable ecosystem that we wanted? What if we actually treated the people who were disconnected as humans who had something to contribute? Whether it's their problem solving or their genius, what if we treated them as an opportunity instead of a problem? And I think that it's important for that to be a living question that just bothers you. Because anytime we talk about this, we often talk about it like it's a problem and the people who are disconnected need our charity and our subsidies, when quite frankly, they've actually been supporting those of us who are connected all along. And so I think we need to be able to see that differently and be able to also see quantitatively why that's true, not just Francella's idea of truth. And so I think when we're looking at some of the ways that we can move forward, I think it's important that we aren't just setting our eyes on mediocre. It is really dangerous for us to have this transformative moment of investments and set our eyes on mediocre baseline goals. Because we will have this same symposium and these same questions in 10 and 15 years if we don't. It's not going to change. And I think that it's really important that we actually decide that we can pursue excellence with the limited resources that we have, instead of just settling for mediocre. You know, I think I come to Detroit often. I told Pirouette that I think I'm in Michigan and Texas more than any other state when I think about cities that I visit. And I think a lot about the fact that one of the first times that I came to Detroit, I had time to go to the art museum, which was single-handedly one of the most incredible museums I have ever been to in the United States. Being able to just like walk the streets of downtown, remembering the fact that this is the place where, you know, back in the 1940s and 50s, they created over 100,000 jobs in the city limits in less than 20 years, which actually makes like Detroit this economic engine. It was like something that people marveled at from across the United States. It just couldn't be done in any other place. This is also home to the place when we think about the Detroit Rebellion, not about the violence, but about the fact that the residents actually stood up to say no more inequality. And so when we think about the power that's here in Detroit, this isn't just about wires and like, hopefully we get this right. This is about us actually having a chance to influence how history records what we do here. And so I think it's important when we are talking about research today, we're gonna cover a lot of different topics, and I'm really excited, you know, just to be able to share time and space with scholars that I really admire. I think that some of the questions that you bring up today, I think sometimes we have to be okay with there not being a definitive answer, even if that's just coupled with our commitment to do something. Because I think we can do hard things. That is the optimist in me. I think we can do extraordinary things if we put our minds to it. And especially when we have this type of support, when you not only have community leaders, you have educational partners, you have private investors, and a city behind you, there is something special that happens in Detroit that does not exist in many municipalities across the country. So thank you so much for sharing your time and attention with me, and thank you so much for the invite for all of you.
All right, so at this time, we'll take a couple questions. Is there anybody who has a question? I can move the mic around so that Francella can hear you and she can respond. Reactions, comments, if not a question?
So, Francella, you were telling me a little bit before your presentation about how you've had some opportunity to interface and travel with politicians and others who are doing the digital equity work and digital inclusion work in other countries. Could you relate just a little bit where our conversation got cut off, and I think it's very relevant to this audience? What are you learning about what others are doing in other countries that would be food for thought here or best practices, or are we getting it? Are we leading the pack? Like, what's the difference there internationally?
Okay, so at the beginning of our conversation, I mentioned that I'm going to be traveling with some members of Congress to Berlin, Brussels, London to share ideas about digital equity and essentially also tech policy in general. One of the things that from my research on some of these other places is that number one, we are not taking competition policy seriously. I think we're really excited about investments, but we don't think about the fact that, okay, so let's just say you get the money to launch the project that you have your eyes set on. We didn't think about the fact that most of the country will not have more than 2 serious choices in providers. So the price of service and the quality of service will always be at around, at a level that's set by the providers, rather than having a market where iron sharpens iron, where if you have high competition, it forces the costs down and also the quality of service options to go up. And so I think that's one thing that we don't talk a lot about, because if I could just give you guys a little piece of history, and this is also documented in my report. So back in the late 1800s, when we were really kind of starting the telephone monopolies, one of the things that was really important, and I was kind of surprised by, the reason why I was looking for it was I was looking for where did universal service come from? I was surprised to find out that universal service, the actual quote, came from a company motto in my search to find out, like, essentially, how did this eventually happen? The fact that the main telephone company at the time had an uninterrupted monopoly for almost 40 years. The FCC was actually created to regulate that monopoly, but when the FCC was created, there was an idea that private industries could do something that the government couldn't do and really didn't want to do. Because you have to understand, at the time, they're breaking up railroad monopolies, they're breaking up other monopolies. They just saw that the telephone monopoly was something that was treated as something different. And the controls and the lopsided power dynamics that were born at that time back in 1934 are things that essentially not only influenced the 1934 Communications Act, they were codified in the 1996 Communications Act, but it's those power dynamics lived on. And so we created a market where, because you only had 1 or 2 choices in terms of your telephone service, I don't think it occurred to people to ask for more than 1 or 2 choices for internet. And so here we are in this moment in 2022 where people are saying, wait a second, I only have 1 or 2 choices, and maybe that's not the best idea. And so I think to whatever extent we can start asking questions about what are sustainable models about having other options, that's something that's incredibly important that other countries have taken seriously, but I concede that their models are very often based on either entirely or partially publicly funded networks, so it's a little bit different than our markets. And also, as a side note, I think other countries benefited from the US exploring and really experimenting with a private model because they could see what was happening in the US and then create models where they said, we're gonna go ahead and invest in it as a government. And another piece that I think is really important there, they're not debating whether or not it's a public good. Like, we're still tiptoeing around those words. I think there are some, municipalities that have been, those things have come up in litigation. Even if they call, internet service a utility and then somebody's challenging that. I mean, the truth is, those of us who get to argue about that are probably already connected, right? And so I think that's another piece, that they're not challenging the semantics. There's less contention when it comes to like challenging power dynamics and money. So people can just focus on making sure everyone has access to what they all recognize as a public good.
Good morning, and very insightful. I was going to ask you, what is the role of R1 research universities like Wayne State and University of Michigan and Michigan State University? What is our role in helping support this and help it become successful? And if you have examples, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think, when I think about, well, here in Michigan, I love, I follow Quello Center all the time. I see their statistics always show up in the governor's press releases. You can usually track them directly back. Sorry that I outed that, but I do check hyperlinks and citations. But when I think about the role of research, I think that sometimes, academics get to expand and really elaborate on ideas in a way that it isn't treated as a market threat. And the truth is that look at places like Purdue, right? I mean, what started is, I think it was maybe one or two publications maybe every once a year. That is turned into a major project to start churning out proof to say, wait a second, you're saying broadband's not a good investment? Well, here's our research to say for every dollar you invest, $4 comes back to the economy in the state of Indiana. When you look at places like upstate New York, I love one of the librarians told me that we're not just New York City. And so one of the things that they did was they partnered with philanthropy just to be able to get actual academic research, and also some of the local professors to get academic research to actually say, here are our data points to show why we should be investing in different projects. I think for me at Harvard and MIT tend to focus a lot on data. One thing I worry about is that we started by we didn't start. First of all, we shouldn't be using binary counts to just say yes or no that you're connected, because it is different than a telephone, and we inherited that from a telephone model. So back when we measured who had telephone, it was yes, you had it, or no, you didn't. That doesn't make sense that we inherited that with internet, because saying that it comes to your street does not mean that you benefit from technology. But we use that same binary code. So I appreciate efforts to collect data and improve data, but it's fundamentally flawed, and we need to rethink what information are we collecting. I think in places like Texas, California, because I know that we did a report with Berkeley Center. It was one of the ones about access to justice. It actually started with some students we were working on that we were investigating low-income subsidy programs. We basically gave the students an opportunity to write an ex parte and a report for the FCC before they graduated. We were in a meeting with them, and one of the social services offices that they interviewed, they said, well, we never knew these subsidies existed. No one ever told us. So if you just told us that, we would have shared it with the people who needed it. So the students went out and interviewed public defenders. They talked to judges. They talked to social workers. They talked to all of these different people in the ecosystem of people who actually needed access and who didn't have it. And they go out and do one of the interviews, and the gentleman says, I was the only one on the phone in my custody hearing, and everyone else was on video. And I think just to make that real for people, that you're the person on the phone and everybody else is on Zoom. And so at first the judge chided him for not understanding what he was saying, not knowing that it was breaking up. So when he went off and called in, he essentially didn't get a good judgment, and no one said anything other than, well, we didn't realize it was a problem, you can appeal the hearing. And so we went on in pursuit of finding these stories, because I think it doesn't even occur to people that are connected that there are people that are in their eviction hearing on the phone. They are doing mental health appointments in the library. A librarian told us that. And so I think when we ask really hard questions, sometimes it's hard for advocates to lead that work, and sometimes it's helpful for it to come to from a more objective place, even if it is aimed at a specific goal. When you look at University of Pennsylvania's Mike Center, Media and Inequality Center, the call of their work is aimed at justice for people who are poor. But at the same time, when they go and document people who use public Wi-Fi access points are over-policed and tend to be arrested at a higher rate, that means something different to come from them than it does from the person who got arrested unjustly. So to whatever extent there are questions that we should be asking, I hope people ask hard questions. When it comes to funding, I understand in academia that is always an issue. I think that it's helpful for people to actually show that this is information that can be used for policymakers, not only in your state, but even at the federal level. And especially when you are a place like Wayne State University, I think that the state government and the county would welcome information like that, because when you can give people data points that they can actually turn into justification for programs, that's helpful for everyone.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. So you should all have a program booklet. We are getting ready to transition to our concurrent session period. And there are some folks from the Connect 313 team in the back. If you haven't already received it, they have an addition that goes into the program that can show you the synopsis of every one of the sessions that is happening in the rooms. In the back by the stairs, there is a list of each room and each topic and what room it is located in. The rooms are B and C down here, and upstairs, it's E, F, and H. There are stairs over here, and there's an elevator over here. You don't have to rush. Concurrent sessions start at 10:15, so you can take your time. Please eat the breakfast, because in a moment they'll be here with lunch. And then just make sure you make your way and enjoy yourself the rest of the day. The Connect 313 team is roaming around to provide you with any clarity or access to assistance that you might feel that you need. Thank you so much.